Texas, 1856. The land did not forgive easily. It remembered every footprint pressed into its dry skin, every drop of blood spilled into its dust. The wind carried old screams through the mesquite and cedar, though no one living admitted to hearing them. The frontier looked empty to outsiders, but men who knew it understood the truth. Texas watched, and sometimes it waited. But wait for a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe. 5 riders moved across that land just before sunset, cutting through the tall grass like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. They rode in a loose line, spread far enough apart that no single rifle shot could take more than one of them. This was not caution learned in books. It was instinct sharpened by years of violence. Their horses were lean and strong, ribs barely hidden beneath dust-coated hides, muscles trained to endure long chases without water. Each animal bore the scars of spurs and whips, reminders that mercy was not expected in this part of the world. The men were worse. Silas Crow rode at the front. He was broad-shouldered and heavy in the saddle, his coat hanging open despite the evening chill. A thick beard covered most of his face, streaked with gray long before its time. His eyes, pale and unblinking, scanned the horizon with the detached focus of a man reading a map only he could see. A rifle rested across his saddle horn, worn smooth by constant use. Silas did not talk much. He did not need to. His reputation traveled faster than words. Behind him rode Thomas Hale, younger by at least a decade, with sharp features and restless hands. Thomas liked knives. He liked the intimacy of them, the way a man had to be close to use one properly. Several hung from his belt, their handles polished from use. His smile came easily, but it never reached his eyes. Jonah Pike followed, thin as a fence rail and twice as crooked. He had once been a preacher, or so he claimed, though no one believed him anymore. He quoted scripture when it amused him and laughed while doing things that would have sent him to hell if such a place existed. He carried a shotgun loaded with buckshot, the weapon of a man who preferred not to miss. Eli Mercer rode forth, silent and watchful. He had been a soldier once, long before the frontier had burned away whatever discipline remained in him. His movements were precise, economical. He spoke only when necessary, and when he did, others listened. A scar ran from his left ear down into his collar, disappearing beneath his shirt. The last rider was Caleb Finch, barely more than a boy compared to the rest. He had joined them less than a year earlier. His hands were still too clean, his eyes too wide. But he learned quickly, and in Texas learning was the difference between survival and a shallow grave. Together they were known as Crow's men, slave hunters, bounty men, dogs. If you asked the people who feared them most, they had been riding since dawn, following signs invisible to anyone else, broken grass bent the wrong way, a snapped twig too fresh to be animal work, the faintest trace of ash, where a fire had been buried in haste. To Silas Crow the trail was as clear as a road. 3, he muttered, slowing his horse. The others reined in without question. Maybe 4, Eli said after a moment, scanning the ground. Silas shook his head. 3, 1 limping. Thomas grinned. Easy money then. That was how they framed it. Not people, not lives, just currency walking on 2 legs. In 1856, Texas was full of men like them, but few were as efficient. Runaway slaves flowed south and west, drawn by rumors of freedom in Mexico or lost somewhere beyond the horizon. Most never made it. The land killed some. Hunger took others, and then there were men like Crow's men, who turned suffering into profit. They followed the trail toward the Brazos River, where the land dipped and the trees grew thicker. The sun bled red across the sky, staining the clouds like an open wound. Cicadas screamed from the brush, their noise filling the air with a sense of urgency, as if the world itself were warning something to hurry. Caleb swallowed. We camping tonight? Silas glanced at the sky. After what? Caleb asked. Silas did not answer immediately. He nudged his horse forward, eyes fixed ahead. After we collect. They found the first sign of the fugitives just before dark. A shallow creek crossed their path, its banks muddy and torn. Bare footprints pressed deep into the wet earth, toes splayed from exhaustion. One set dragged slightly, confirming Silas's earlier assessment. Jonah crouched, touching the ground. They crossed here not long ago. How long? Thomas asked. Jonah sniffed his fingers, as if the earth carried a scent only he could read. 2 hours, maybe less. Silas nodded. They won't get far before night. Night on the frontier was a liar. It promised rest and delivered terror. Fires gave away position. Silence invited predators, both animal and human. They followed the creek downstream, moving slowly now, letting the darkness do some of the work for them. Silas raised a hand, fist clenched. They stopped. Ahead between the trees a faint orange glow flickered. A fire, poorly hidden. Desperate, Thomas's grin widened. Told you, easy. Silas dismounted, moving with surprising grace for a man his size. The others followed, tying their horses back and advancing on foot. Weapons were checked, straps tightened. No one spoke. They approached from downwind. 3 figures sat near the fire, 2 men and a woman. The woman clutched a small bundle close to her chest, rocking slightly. The baby inside made no sound, as if it had learned early that noise meant death. One of the men stood suddenly, eyes wide, sensing something wrong. That was when Silas stepped into the firelight. "Evenin'," he said calmly. The man froze. The second man reached for something, maybe a stick, maybe nothing at all. A gunshot exploded in the night, Jonah's shotgun roaring once. The man fell backward, chest torn open. The woman screamed. Chaos followed, brief and one-sided. Thomas moved fast, knife flashing. Eli circled wide, cutting off escape. Silas advanced steadily, like an executioner with all the time in the world. The standing man tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Silas shot him in the back. The woman collapsed to her knees, sobbing, the baby still silent against her chest. Caleb stood frozen, breathing hard, staring at the bodies on the ground. Silas crouched in front of the woman. "You run far," he said, not unkindly, but not far enough. She looked up at him with hate so pure it almost surprised him. "Chain her," Silas said, standing. As Eli moved to obey, Silas's eyes caught something at the edge of the firelight, another figure sitting just beyond the glow, partially hidden by shadow. A man. He was leaning against a tree, one leg stretched awkwardly, blood darkening his trousers. His hands rested loosely on his knees. He did not move. He did not run. He watched. Silas studied him for a long moment. "Miss one?" Thomas asked, stepping closer. The man lifted his head slightly. Firelight revealed a gaunt face, pale beneath grime and dried blood. His eyes were dark, steady. Calculating, he looked at Silas, not with fear, not with anger, but with something colder, recognition, not of Silas himself, but of what Silas represented. "What's your name?" Silas asked. The man did not answer. Jonah snorted. "Cat got his tongue." Silas stepped closer. "You hurt?" The man nodded once. "Run with them?" Another nod. "You don't look like a field hand." A pause, then quietly, "I ran." Silas considered him. The man's clothes were worn, but not the rough cotton most slaves wore. His hands, though dirty, were N.O.T. scarred from years of forced labor. His posture, even seated and injured, held a strange discipline. Eli noticed it too. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Where you from?" Silas asked. "East," the man replied, not a lie, not the truth either. Silas gestured to Caleb. "Chain him too." Caleb hesitated. "He don't look." Silas's stare silenced him. Caleb moved forward, shackles clinking. As the iron closed around the man's wrists, their eyes met again. The man did not resist. He did not beg. He only smiled. Just barely. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Silas turned away, already calculating routes and prices. Another job done. Another profit earned. Behind him, the injured man shifted slightly against the tree, testing the weight of the chains, listening to the sounds of the night with careful attention. Texas watched, and it did not forget. The fire had burned low by the time Silas Crow gave the order to move. Night had fully claimed the land now. The stars above Texas were sharp and merciless, scattered across the sky like cold witnesses. The moon hung thin and pale, offering just enough light to turn shadows into shapes and shapes into threats. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called once, then fell silent. The captive sat on the ground, wrists bound with iron, ankles chained together. The woman rocked slowly, whispering prayers into her baby's ear. Caleb avoided looking at her. Jonah did not. The injured man remained apart, his back still against the tree, chains resting loosely across his lap. Blood had dried stiff along his thigh, dark and cracked like old paint. His breathing was shallow but steady. Every few moments his eyes shifted, never frantic, never lost, always measuring. Silas noticed. Men who were truly broken stared at the ground. Men who were afraid stared everywhere at once. This one watched purposefully. "Get him up," Silas said. Eli stepped forward and grabbed the man under the arm, hauling him to his feet. The injured leg buckled for half a second, but the man adjusted, redistributing his weight without a sound. No cry, no curse. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Tough one." "Or stupid," Jonah said. Silas said nothing. They marched them north, away from the river, deeper into rough country where rocks tore at boots and thorns clawed at skin. The horses were led slowly, their hooves muffled by dirt and dry grass. No one lit a torch. Fire made you visible. Darkness made you careful. The woman stumbled once. Caleb caught her before she fell. "Keep moving," Silas said, not turning back. Hours passed, time lost, meaning the way it always did during forced marches. There was only the rhythm of footsteps, the jangle of chains, the occasional grunt of pain when the injured man misjudged his step. Each time, he corrected himself quickly, jaw clenched, breath controlled. Eli walked beside him now, close enough to intervene if needed. "You military?" Eli asked quietly. The man did not answer. "You walk like it," Eli continued, "even hurt." Silence. Eli glanced at his leg. "That wound ain't from a whip." "No," the man said. His voice was calm. Low, unhurried, Eli waited. From what then? The man met his eyes briefly. A knife. Eli nodded once. That told him enough to be cautious. They stopped just before dawn. The land opened into a shallow basin ringed by scrub oak and stone. From a distance it looked empty. Up close it felt watched. The air was still heavy with the smell of earth and old leaves. Silas chose the spot carefully. Camp here, he said. The captives were forced to sit near a cluster of rocks. Chains were looped through iron spikes hammered into the ground. The woman cried quietly now, exhausted beyond fear. Caleb knelt to give her water. Silas allowed it. Kindness cost nothing when it didn't interfere with profit. The injured man was secured last. Silas crouched in front of him, close enough that they shared the same breath. You ever been chained before? Silas asked. The man looked down at the iron around his wrists. Yes. Runaways usually beg, Silas said. You don't. The man shrugged slightly. Begging don't loosen chains. Silas smiled thinly. Smart. He stood and walked away. As the others settled into shifts, Eli sat on a rock, rifle across his knees. He kept his eyes on the injured man. Jonah leaned close to Thomas, whispering, something off about him. Thomas chuckled softly. They're all off. No, Jonah said, this one's different. Thomas glanced toward the man. The firelight barely reached him, but his outline was clear enough. Still patient, Thomas felt an unexpected shiver. Dawn came slow. The sky lightened in bruised shades of purple and gray. Birds began to stir. The land exhaled. Silas rose first, stretching his back. Move out in 10. The injured man was watching the horizon now, eyes narrowed against the growing light. See something? Caleb asked, trying to sound casual. Listening, the man replied. Caleb frowned. To what? The man didn't answer. They moved again. The terrain grew harsher as the day wore on. Rocks cut through thin soles. Heat climbed quickly, pressing down like a hand on the back of the neck. Sweat soaked clothes, stung eyes. The woman collapsed just before noon. Silas cursed under his breath. Eli knelt beside her, checked her pulse. She's alive. Won't last at this pace, Eli added. Silas considered. Supplies were limited. Time was money. The injured man watched silently. Silas made his decision. Leave her, Jonah said easily. Caleb spun around. What? She ain't worth much with a baby, Jonah continued. And dead weight's dead weight. Caleb looked to Silas. Sir, Silas held up a hand. The woman clutched her child tighter, eyes wide with terror. The injured man spoke. If you stop, he said calmly. She lives. Silas turned slowly. And how you figure that? There's water ahead, the man said. Less than a mile, low ground, you'll smell it before you see it. Silas studied him. You know this land? The man met his gaze. I've walked it. Eli frowned. We didn't cross water on the map. No, the man said, because it's not a river, it's runoff, seasonal. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured. Eli and Thomas moved ahead cautiously. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then Eli's whistle cut through the heat. They found water. Not much. A muddy trickle between stones. But enough. The woman drank greedily, sobbing with relief. Caleb stared at the injured man like he'd just seen a ghost. Silas approached him again. You just bought her time. Didn't do it for you, the man said. Silas smiled. No, you did it for yourself. I asked that because now I'm curious. Curiosity was dangerous. They rested briefly, then continued. The heat softened toward evening. Shadows lengthened. That night the horses grew restless. One stamped and snorted, ears flat. Another pulled at its tether, eyes rolling. Thomas swore. Something's spooking 'em. Silas scanned the darkness. Predators? Eli shook his head. No. The injured man watched the tree line. They smell blood, he said. Jonah laughed. Ain't that new? No, the man said. Fresh blood. Silence followed. Caleb swallowed. We're all here. The man didn't respond. That was when a scream tore through the night, sharp, sudden, cut off too quickly. Everyone reached for a weapon. Who was that? Caleb whispered. Silas counted heads. One's missing. They found him a short distance from camp, or what was left of him. The body lay twisted among the brush, throat opened cleanly. His rifle was gone. Chains, their chains, were wrapped tight around his hands, biting deep into flesh. Jonah gagged. Caleb stumbled back. Silas crouched slowly, examining the wound. Clean cut, Eli said. No hesitation. Silas stood. His gaze drifted back to camp, to the captives. Al were still chained, including the injured man, who sat exactly where he had been left, watching. Silas felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but the unsettling realization that somewhere along the way they had made a mistake, a serious one, and the land of Texas, vast and silent, seemed to lean closer. As if eager to see how it would be corrected, no one spoke for a long time. The dead man lay where he had fallen, his body already cooling, blood soaking into the thirsty Texas soil. The night insects had gone silent, as if even they understood something had changed. Firelight flickered weakly, throwing long broken shadows that twisted with every movement of the flames. Silas Crow straightened slowly, his knees stiff, his face unreadable. Years of violence had taught him how to look at death without blinking, but this was different. This wasn't a shooting gone wrong or a knife pulled too fast in the dark. This was deliberate, precise, personal. He turned his head, scanning the tree line again, then the rocks, then the black space beyond the fire where the land swallowed light. "Everyone back to camp," he said quietly. No one argued. They moved together, tighter now, weapons raised. The darkness pressed closer as they walked, every rustle sounding like a footstep, every shifting shadow threatening to become a man. The captives were still where they had been left. The woman clutched her baby, trembling violently. The child had finally begun to cry, soft at first, then louder, desperate and thin. The injured man sat apart, just as before, chains still on his wrists, chains still on his ankles. His posture had not changed, but his eyes they were more alert now, sharper. Like a door cracked open just enough to look through, Jonah pointed his shotgun at the man. "Don't move." The man didn't. Silas studied him carefully. "You hear anything?" Silas asked. The man tilted his head slightly. "I heard screaming." Silas's jaw tightened. Before that, the man considered. "Footsteps." Eli stiffened. "From where?" "Everywhere," the man said calmly. Jonah scoffed, though his voice wavered. "That don't make sense." The man's gaze slid to Jonah. "It will." Silas held up a hand. "Enough." He turned to Eli. "You see tracks?" Eli nodded. "Plenty." Eli hesitated. "One set, maybe." "Maybe?" Thomas snapped. "They overlap," Eli said. "Like he wanted it that way." Silas exhaled slowly through his nose. One man, moving close enough to camp to kill, then vanish without a trace. Using their own chains, stealing their rifle. Silas had hunted men like that before. Men who didn't panic, men who didn't rush, men who planned. He turned back to the injured captive. "What's your name?" Silas asked again. The man met his eyes. "Names don't matter." "They do to me." A pause. "Then call me what you want." Silas stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Fair enough." He stepped away and addressed the group. "No sleep tonight," Silas said. "2 men on watch. Rotations every hour." Caleb swallowed. "Sir, what if he comes back?" Silas finished. Caleb nodded. Silas's voice hardened. "Then we put him down." They dragged the dead man's body farther from camp, laying him between rocks. No burial, no prayer. There was no time. The fire was kept low. The night stretched. Caleb took the first watch with Thomas. They sat back to back, rifles across their knees, eyes straining into the dark. Minutes crawled by. Caleb's thoughts raced. He kept seeing the chains wrapped around the dead man's hands. Kept hearing the scream cut short. "You think it's him?" Caleb whispered. Thomas didn't answer right away. Finally, "I don't think it matters." Caleb frowned. "How can it not?" Thomas shifted, scanning the trees. "Because whether it's him or someone else, we're in the wrong place to find out." The wind shifted. The fir. Crackled. Somewhere to the left, a branch snapped. Thomas stood instantly. "Who's there?" Silence. Caleb's heart hammered. Then nothing. No movement. No sound. An hour passed. Eli relieved them without a word. Caleb went to sit near the woman and the injured man, pulling his knees up to his chest. He tried not to look at the chains. The injured man spoke softly. "You don't belong with them." Caleb flinched. "Don't talk." "I wasn't talking to them." Caleb hesitated. "You don't know me." The man studied him. "I know you haven't learned how to sleep with screams yet." Caleb looked away. "What happened to the man?" Caleb asked quietly. The injured man's eyes drifted toward the darkness. "He walked where he shouldn't." Caleb swallowed. "Who did it?" The man didn't answer. Caleb's watch came again just before dawn. The sky was beginning to pale when it happened. A horse screamed, not a whinny, a scream. The sound tore through the camp like a blade. Everyone was on their feet instantly. Silas ran toward the noise. They found the horse tangled in its tether, eyes wide with terror, throat torn open. Blood steamed faintly in the cool morning air. The rope had been cut, clean. Thomas swore violently. "He's toying with us." Silas said nothing. Eli examined the ground. Same pattern, tracks overlap, hard to read. Jonah's voice cracked. "We need to move." Silas nodded slowly. "We move now." They broke camp in minutes, no breakfast, no rest. The captives were dragged to their feet, chains biting into skin. The injured man stood without assistance. His limp was worse now, but his balance remained perfect. They traveled fast, too fast. By midday, mistakes crept in. Jonah stumbled on loose stone, nearly dropping his shotgun. Thomas snapped at Caleb for lagging. Silas missed a sign just once. The injured man noticed. That night they camped in tighter formation, backs almost touching. The fire was no more than embers. No one laughed. No one relaxed. Sleep came in fragments. A scream shattered the darkness. This one was closer. Too close. Caleb jolted awake to chaos. A shadow burst through the edge of camp. Gunfire erupted. Someone shouted. Someone fell. Caleb saw a shape move past the firelight. Fast, low, deliberate. A knife flashed. Thomas went down, clutching his side, blood pouring between his fingers. The shadow was gone before Silas could fire. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Thomas gasped, eyes wide. He didn't hesitate. Silas knelt beside him. Where'd he come from? Thomas shook his head. Everywhere. Eli pressed cloth to the wound. He'll live. Silas stood slowly. He looked at the captives, counted. They were all still there, still chained, still watching. The injured man met Silas's gaze again. Silas felt it now, not fear, respect, and something colder beneath it. The understanding that whatever was hunting them knew exactly how they thought, because he had once thought, the same way. Silas walked closer to the injured man. You ever hunt men? Silas asked. The man answered without hesitation. Yes. Silas nodded once. Why stop? The man's expression didn't change. I didn't. The words settled into the camp like ash. Silas stepped back, eyes scanning the darkness once more. For the first time in years, Silas Crow understood a simple truth. The land had turned against them. And whoever walked unseen through the trees was not improvising. He was executing something that had begun long before they ever put chains on his wrists. Texas watched, and it was no longer waiting. Morning came without mercy. The sky lightened slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what the night had done. Pale gray bled into dull blue above the tree line, but the air remained cold, sharp enough to sting exposed skin. The camp looked smaller in daylight, more fragile, like something temporary that didn't belong. Thomas Hale lay on his back near the dying M. Burrs, face slick with sweat, teeth clenched hard enough to creak. Eli knelt beside him, hands steady, fingers red as he worked. The knife wound in Thomas's side was deep but clean, too clean. Whoever had cut him had known exactly where to place the blade. Silas Crow stood a few steps away, arms crossed, jaw locked. He watched Eli work, but his eyes kept drifting outward, toward the trees, toward the open land that now felt far too close. Jonah paced like a caged animal. We should have shot into the dark, he muttered. Should have lit the whole damn place up. And given him targets, Eli said without looking up. No, Jonah spat into the dirt. You always got an answer. Silas raised a hand. Enough. Eli finished wrapping the wound and leaned back. He won't bleed out, but he can't ride hard. Thomas laughed weakly. Guess that makes me baggage now. No one responded. Caleb sat near the captives, knees pulled up, arms wrapped tight around himself. He hadn't slept since the first scream. Every time his eyes closed, he saw the shadow moving through camp, fast, deliberate, close enough to touch. The woman rocked her baby, whispering again. The child's cries had softened to whimpers, exhausted like everyone else. The injured man sat exactly where he always did, chains still on, posture unchanged. But Silas noticed something different now. The man wasn't watching the land anymore. He was watching them. Silas approached slowly, boots crunching softly on gravel. You knew he'd come back, Silas said. The man looked up. I knew he wouldn't leave. Silas crouched, meeting his eyes at level. You keep talking like there's only one. There is, the man replied. Jonah laughed harshly. You expect us to believe one man's doing all this? The man's gaze slid to Jonah. Do you expect to survive by underestimating him? Jonah's smile faded. Silas stood. We move at first light. Eli frowned. Thomas, we move, Silas repeated. They broke camp quickly, tension sharpening every movement. No one strayed far. Weapons stayed in hands, not slung over shoulders. The dead horse was left where it lay. They moved west now, cutting through rougher terrain, stone and scrub, narrow passes where sound carried too far, and sightlines vanished too quickly. Silas chose the route deliberately. Fewer places to hide, or so he hoped. By midday the heat returned, relentless and punishing. Thomas rode hunched in the saddle, face pale. Eli stayed close, steadying him when needed. Caleb lagged behind, struggling to keep pace while watching every shadow. The injured man walked without complaint. His limp was pronounced now, each step measured, controlled. Sweat darkened his shirt, but his breathing remained even. Too even, Silas noticed. You should be slowing down, Silas said. The man shook his head. Pain doesn't change distance. Silas studied him for a moment, then turned away. The first shot came without warning. A sharp crack echoed through the pass. Jonah screamed and fell, clutching his shoulder as blood sprayed. Cover! Silas roared. They scattered instinctively, pressing against rocks, rifles searching for a target that wasn't there. Another shot rang out, stone chipped inches from Caleb's head. He dropped flat, heart hammering. Where is he? Thomas shouted. No answer. Eli fired once into the rocks above. Nothing. Silas scanned the ridgeline, then he saw it, a movement, just a flicker. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed uselessly. Silence followed. Jonah groaned, cradling his arm. He's trying to bleed us out. Silas approached Jonah, ripping cloth to bind the wound. He's testing. Testing what? Jonah hissed. How we move. They regrouped, tighter now, slower. The pass narrowed ahead. The injured man spoke. He'll strike again there. Silas glanced at him. Why? Because you'll have to slow down, the man said, and because sound bounces. Silas considered, then nodded to Eli. You and me. Front. They moved forward cautiously, too cautiously. The land was quiet, too quiet. Then a scream, not Jonah, not Thomas, Caleb. Silas spun. Caleb lay on the ground, clutching his leg, blood pooling beneath him. A trap, hidden spikes driven through flesh. Help me, Caleb cried. Silas rushed back. Eli knelt, face grim. He placed it knowing we'd run to each other. Silas looked around wildly. Where is he? A voice answered. Close, right where you left him. The voice came from behind. Too close. Silas turned, firing blindly. Nothing. The sound of chains hitting dirt echoed behind him. Silas froze. Slowly he turned. The injured man was standing, unchained. The iron lay open at his feet. Silas felt the world tilt. You, Silas breathed. The man stepped forward, favoring his injured leg but steady. I told you, he said calmly. Begging doesn't loosen chains. Jonah reached for his shotgun. The man threw a knife. Jonah fell without a sound. Eli raised his rifle. The man fired first. Eli collapsed, eyes wide with surprise. Thomas screamed in rage and fear, firing wildly. The man moved like water, slipping behind stone, reappearing where no one expected. Silas fired again and again. Missed. The man emerged behind Thomas. One motion, one cut. Thomas slumped forward, lifeless. Caleb sobbed, dragging himself backward. Silas stood alone now. The land silent again. The man faced him. No rush, no triumph, just certainty. Silas raised his rifle slowly. So this is it, Silas said. The man nodded once. This is where it turns. Silas laughed softly. You think this ends me? No, the man said. It ends this. Silas fired. The man vanished sideways. A blow struck Silas from behind. The rifle flew from his hands. He hit the ground hard, breath exploding from his lungs. Boots stepped into view. The man stood over him, blade catching the sun. Silas coughed, blood on his lips. Who are you? The man considered the question. Then someone you made. The blade fell when soldiers would later find the place. They would find bodies scattered through stone and dust. Weapons dropped where hands had failed them. Traps sprung and blood darkened by time. They would find chains, broken, empty, and they would wonder how hunters had become prey. Texas would not answer. It never did. Silence returned slowly. Not all at once, not cleanly. It seeped back into the land the way blood soaked into dust, uneven, stubborn, leaving stains that would not fade. The echoes of gunfire and screams lingered in the rocks, bouncing faintly before dissolving into the wide Texas sky. The man stood alone among the dead. Silas Crow lay at his feet, eyes open, unseeing, mouth twisted into something that might once have been defiance. Blood spread beneath him in a dark, irregular shape, soaking into the ground that had witnessed too many endings already. For a long moment the man did not move. His chest rose and fell slowly. Pain flared hot along his wounded leg, but he did not acknowledge it. Pain was information, nothing more. He had learned that long ago. He looked around the pass. Jonah Pike lay where he had fallen, knife buried deep, shotgun useless at his side. Eli Mercer lay face down near the rocks, fingers still curled as if trying to pull himself forward. Thomas Hale was slumped against stone, eyes wide, expression frozen somewhere between rage and disbelief. Caleb Finch was still alive. Barely. The boy lay several yards away, dragged halfway out of the trap, blood darkening his trousers. His face was pale, lips trembling. His eyes, wide, terrified, were locked on the man. The man noticed him at last. He turned and limped toward Caleb, every step deliberate. Gravel shifted under his boots. The sound made Caleb flinch violently. Please, Caleb whispered. Please don't. The man stopped a few feet away. He studied the boy carefully, not with cruelty, with assess. You shouldn't have come with them, the man said quietly. Caleb sobbed. I didn't know. I swear I just needed work. The man crouched slowly, wincing as his injured leg bent. He kept his knife low, visible but not raised. Stand still, he said. Caleb shook his head frantically. I can't, my leg. I said stand still, the man repeated, voice firm now. Caleb froze. The man leaned forward and cut the trap free with quick, efficient movements. The iron spikes were slick with blood. He tossed them aside. Caleb gasped as pressure eased, then cried out as pain rushed back in. The man tore strips from his own shirt and wrapped Caleb's leg tightly, knotting the cloth with practiced hands. You'll live, he said. Caleb stared at him through tears. Why? The man paused. Because you don't understand yet, he answered. Caleb swallowed. Understand what? The man straightened slowly. What kind of world you're helping build? Caleb looked around at the bodies, at the blood, at the empty land stretching endlessly beyond. I don't want to be like them, Caleb whispered. The man met his gaze. Then remember this. He turned away. Caleb called after him. What about the woman, the baby? The man stopped. He closed his eyes briefly, then nodded once. They're free. He limped back toward the camp. The woman saw him coming and screamed, pulling her child tight. Her fear was raw, instinctive. She had watched men kill men. She had learned what shadows meant. The man stopped well out of reach. You can go, he said. She stared at him, uncomprehending. Go, south, he said. There's a trail past the rocks, water after 2 hours. Keep moving. Her hands trembled. You won't stop us? The man shook his head. No one will. She hesitated, then stood shakily, clutching her baby. She did not thank him. She did not speak again. She walked away quickly, never looking back. The man watched until she disappeared into the land. Only then did he allow himself to sit. He leaned against a rock, breath tightening as the pain finally demanded its due. Blood seeped again through the cloth around his thigh. He pressed his hand against it, steady, patient. He thought of another time, another fire, another set of chains. Years earlier, they had called him Nathaniel once, not here, not now. But once, he had been a tracker for the army, hired muscle with a keen eye and a steady hand. He had followed deserters, bandits, men who believed the land would hide them. He had believed in order then, in rules, until he was betrayed, sold out to slavers after a job went wrong, labeled, chained, beaten until his name no longer mattered. He had watched men like Silas Crow laugh as they profited from his suffering. He had escaped, barely, and when he did, he stopped believing in mercy as a default. He learned the land instead, learned how to disappear inside it, learned how fear moved through men, how confidence cracked, how cruelty always left patterns. He had waited years for Crow's men, not chasing, waiting, and when the opportunity came, he stepped into their firelight willingly. The sun was lowering when the man finally stood again. He moved slowly through the pass, collecting what he needed: ammunition, food, a canteen. He left the money untouched. It meant nothing. He paused beside Silas Crow one last time. You never knew, he murmured. Then he turned away. By nightfall, the pass was empty. The land closed in around the bodies, shadows stretching, insects returning cautiously, reclaiming what had been disturbed. Caleb Finch would be found 2 days later by a passing trader. He would live. He would never speak of what happened in detail. Not truly. The woman and her child would vanish into rumor. And the man? He walked south and west and nowhere anyone could point to on a map, but stories followed. Stories of hunters who never came back, of chains found broken, empty, cold, of Texas itself earning against men who thought they owned it. And in every story, whether spoken in whispers or shouted over whiskey, there was always the same uneasy truth. Some prey remembers, and some hunters create the thing that hunts them back. The land did not announce his departure. It never did. When the man left the pass, there was no dramatic farewell, no sign carved into stone, no final look back. He simply moved, slowly at first, favoring his injured leg, then settling into a rhythm that pain could not break. The Texas frontier accepted him the way it accepted everything else, without comment, without mercy, without memory of who had the right to walk it. By nightfall, the bodies were already behind him. The land swallowed them quickly. Coyotes would find them before dawn. Birds would circle by morning. In a week, there would be little left to identify who had died there or why. Texas did not keep records. It erased. The man moved south through broken terrain, keeping to low ground where possible, avoiding ridges that cut silhouettes against the sky. His breathing stayed controlled, his pace measured. Pain flared with every step, but he treated it the way he always had, as information. The wound in his thigh was not clean anymore. It burned. Infection was a possibility. He would need to address it soon. He stopped near midnight, settling into a shallow depression between rocks. He cleared the ground carefully, leaving no obvious signs, then lowered himself down with a quiet hiss as his leg protested. He worked by feel, not sight. The bandage was soaked through. He peeled it away slowly, teeth clenched, then cleaned the wound with the last of the water he could spare. The flesh was angry and swollen, but not rotting yet. He redressed it with fresh cloth torn from Silas Crow's coat, an irony he allowed himself to notice. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams tried to surface, faces, voices, chains, but he cut them off the way he had learned to years ago. Sleep was rest, not surrender. He woke at every sound, every shift in the wind, every footstep that wasn't there. At dawn, he moved again. He followed a dry arroyo for miles, then doubled back through brush, then cut across open ground deliberately. Anyone following would struggle. Anyone hunting him would already be making mistakes, because the hunt had changed direction. He reached a shallow water source by late morning, a muddy seep hidden beneath reeds and stone. He drank sparingly, washed his face, then studied the land around him. Tracks, boot prints, not his, fresh. He frowned slightly. Silas Crow's men were dead. That much was certain. But Crow had been known. Men like him always were. Where there was money, there were questions. Someone else was already sniffing around. The man did not hurry. Hurrying made mistakes. He circled wide, climbed a low rise, and watched. By early afternoon they appeared. 3 riders, not soldiers. Too loose. Too careless. Bounty men, different kind. These men wore confidence like armor, rifles slung casually, laughter carried on the wind. They had found something, tracks, rumors, bodies, and believed themselves close to profit. The man watched them for over an hour. He learned their habits. The tall one in front favored his right leg. Old injury. Slower dismount. The one on the left kept touching the pistol at his hip. Nervous. The third lagged behind, distracted, scanning the land without really seeing it. Amateurs. He slipped away unseen. The next 2 days unfolded, the same way. He moved. They followed, slowly at first. Then with growing confidence, they found the pass. They found the bodies. They found the broken chains. And something changed in them. Confidence curdled into excitement. Stories would pay better than bounties. The man watched from afar as they argued, voices sharp, gestures wide. They killed each other, one said. No, another replied. This was done. They were close. Sir, now. Too close. The man made his decision. He did not kill them immediately. That would end nothing. Instead, he taught them. The first lesson came at dusk. One of their horses went missing. No noise, no struggle, just gone. They searched for hours, cursing, rifles ready. They never saw him. The second lesson came at night. A rifle disappeared from beside a sleeping man. Gone when he reached for it, panic set in. The third lesson came before dawn. A scream, short, choked. When the others reached the sound, they found their companion alive, but tied, dangling upside down from a tree, wrists bound with his own belt. A knife lay embedded in the trunk beside his head. Not touching him. Not yet. The man watched from the brush as they cut their friend down, hands shaking, voices breaking. They left before sunrise. They did not take the bodies in the pass with them. They did not look back. The man waited until they were gone, then moved again. Word spread faster than he expected. Texas was good at that. Whispers traveled along trails, through camps, into towns. Men spoke in low voices of a tracker loose in the wild, of chains that didn't hold, of hunters who vanished or came back hollow-eyed and silent. Some dismissed it, others listened. A patrol found the pass 3 weeks later. Soldiers, Texas Rangers. They examined the scene carefully. Bodies scattered, patterns, too clean, too intentional. This wasn't a massacre, one ranger said quietly. No, another agreed. This was a lesson. They followed signs south, then lost them. They always lost them, because the man did not move like someone fleeing. He moved like someone patrolling. He began choosing where the violence happened. Men who hunted slaves, men who trafficked chains, men who thought distance protected them. Sometimes he killed, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he simply watched until fear did the work for him. He learned new routes, new habits, new faces. He became a rumor with teeth, and Texas changed around him, not visibly, not officially, but quietly. Men traveled in larger groups. Chains were hidden, not displayed. Fires burned lower. Some hunters stopped altogether, others didn't. Those were the ones who vanished. By the time winter came, the man's leg had healed into a thick scar. It pulled when the weather changed, reminded him of where it had all turned. He welcomed the reminder. It meant he was still alive, still walking, still paying the debt that had been forced on him. One night, near the edge of a small settlement, he overheard 2 men talking outside a saloon. Crow's crew, one said. Never found him. Texas swallowed him, the other replied. The man moved on. He did not need credit. He did not need justice written down. The land knew, and that was enough. By the time winter loosened its grip on Texas, the land had begun to whisper his name, not aloud, not clearly. Names were dangerous things. They made men feel they understood something. This was not understanding. This was instinct. A tightening in the gut when chains rattled, a hesitation before a hunt, a glance over the shoulder that lingered too long. Men did not speak of him directly. They spoke around him. Heard about the pass? Chains don't hold like they used to. Some things out there don't stay hunted. The man listened when it suited him. Mostly he watched. He moved north again as the weather warmed, following the same invisible currents that had once carried slave hunters from town to town. Where they gathered, suffering followed. Where suffering followed, he eventually arrived. He had learned patience, learned that fear ripened slowly. The settlement of Red Hollow sat where 2 trade trails crossed, a dusty knot of buildings, wood and stone thrown together with no plan beyond survival. It attracted drifters, traders, bounty men. It always had, and now it attracted him. He reached the outskirts dusk, settling into the hills overlooking the town. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. Laughter drifted from the saloon. Horses stamped in their pens. He counted riders, counted rifles, counted the men who wore confidence too easily. 3 groups, one mattered. They called themselves the Hollow Men, former slave hunters who had adapted, changed words but not habits. They spoke of transport, of labor contracts, of escorts, but iron still clinked beneath their coats and fear still followed in their wake. Their leader was a man named Randall Boone. Boone was careful. That made him dangerous. He did not ride openly. He did not boast. He let others do the dirty work and kept his hands clean enough to shake in public. The man watched Boone for 3 days. He watched where he slept, who he trusted, who he left behind. On the 4th night he moved. The first man died quietly, a guard behind the holding barn, alone, bored, leaning against a post. The man came up behind him, blade sliding in with no wasted movement. He lowered the body gently, hiding it beneath hay. No alarm. The second man did not die. He screamed, loud enough to wake half the town. The man made sure of that. By the time lanterns flared and boots hit dirt, the screaming had stopped. The man was gone. The victim was alive, but broken, wrists crushed, chains twisted into flesh. A message. Panic rippled outward. Men shouted orders. Rifles came out. Boone appeared at last, face tight, eyes sharp. "Search," Boone said, "everywhere." They searched. They found nothing, because the man was already gone, watching from above, memorizing how Boone reacted under pressure. Boone did not chase. He pulled his men inward, smart. The next night the man struck again. A wagon burned. Chains melted into useless shapes. Horses cut loose, screaming into the dark. Still no bodies. Fear deepened. By the 3rd night Boone understood. "This isn't random," Boone said quietly to his lieutenant. "He's not killing for numbers." The lieutenant swallowed. "Then what's he doing?" Boone's jaw tightened. "Reducing." The man listened from the edge of the firelight. Boone was closer to truth than he knew. The 4th night the man let himself be seen, just once. A silhouette on a rooftop, still, watching. A shot rang out, missed. The silhouette vanished. Men shouted, fired wildly. Spent fear like ammunition. By dawn, Red Hollow was half empty. Men left without explanation. Boone stayed. That sealed it. The man waited 2 more days. He let Boone think he'd won. Then he walked into Boone's camp at dusk, hands empty, posture relaxed. The guards froze. Boone stepped forward slowly. "You," Boone said, "you're the one." The man nodded once. Boone smiled thinly. "You know what happens now?" "Yes," the man said. "You talk." Boone laughed softly. "I don't bargain." "You already are," the man replied. Boone studied him. "What do you want?" The man's voice was calm, flat. "For you to stop." Boone's smile faded. "That's not how the world works." The man stepped closer. "It is now." Boone raised his hand. The camp erupted. Shots fired. Men fell. The man moved through them, like a memory they couldn't shake. Appearing, vanishing, striking where they were weakest. He used their fear, their noise, their mistakes. When it was over, Boone was on his knees, bleeding, surrounded by bodies that no longer mattered. Boone coughed, laughing weakly. "You think this changes anything?" The man knelt in front of him. "It changes you." Boone looked up. "You gonna kill me?" The man shook his head. Boone frowned. "Why not?" "Because you need to remember," the man said. He leaned closer. "And because others need to see." Boone was found alive the next morning, broken, chains crushed around his wrists, eyes hollow. He never hunted again, neither did anyone who heard his story. The man left Red Hollow before sunrise. He did not look back. He never did. Texas would carry the rest. The land did not celebrate when he left Red Hollow. There were no signs, no omens, no sudden clearing of clouds or shift in the wind to mark an ending. Texas did not believe in conclusions the way men did. It believed in continuance, in scars that stayed, in silence that grew heavy enough to matter. The man walked east for 3 days after Red Hollow, then turned south again, following no road that appeared on any map. His steps were slower now, not from injury. His body had adapted, hardened, but from something deeper. Fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep. A weight carried too long without rest. He had changed the pattern, he knew that much. Hunters no longer moved openly. Chains were hidden or abandoned. Men who once boasted now spoke cautiously, if at all. Routes shifted. Camps dissolved before dawn. The trade did not vanish, it never truly did, but it fractured, weakened, driven underground. Fear had done what laws never could. Still, fear was a temporary thing. The man understood this better than anyone. Fear fades. Memory dulls. Men forget when forgetting becomes convenient, unless the land remembers for them. He reached a stretch of high ground overlooking a broad valley just as the sun sank low. The land spread out beneath him, wide and indifferent. No smoke, no voices, just grass bending in the evening wind. He sat on a rock and watched the light change. For the first time in a long while he allowed himself to be still, not alert, not hunting, just still. His thoughts drifted, uninvited. Faces surfaced. Not the men he had killed, those rarely stayed, but others. the woman by the fire clutching her baby. Caleb Finch, bleeding and terrified, still capable of choosing something different. Men he had once ridden beside long ago before chains had taught him what men were capable of when profit outweighed humanity. He wondered, not for the first time, whether what he had become was inevitable, whether another path had ever existed. The wind answered by carrying the distant sound of hooves. He stood instantly. The riders emerged from the valley below, 4 this time, armed, careful. They rode in a loose spread, scanning the land as if expecting it to move against them. They were not slave hunters, not directly. They wore uniforms. Texas Rangers. The man watched without moving. They stopped below his ridge, conferring quietly. One pointed upward. They had seen him. He considered disappearing. It would have been easy, but something held him there. Curiosity, perhaps, or the sense that this chapter at least needed witnesses. He stayed where he was. The riders dismounted halfway up the slope and approached on foot, rifles lowered but ready. Their leader, a man with gray at his temples and eyes that missed little, stopped several yards away. "You've been busy," the ranger said. The man did not respond. "We've followed your trail a long way," the ranger continued. "Or tried to." The man tilted his head slightly. "You're not very good at it." The ranger smiled faintly. "That's probably intentional." Silence stretched between them. Finally, the ranger spoke again. "You killed Silas Crow." The man nodded once. "You broke Boone." Another nod. "You scared half the men in this territory into changing their ways." The man said nothing. The ranger exhaled slowly. "Some folks would call you a murderer." The man met his gaze. "Some folks would call me late." The ranger considered that. "What do you call yourself?" he asked. The man looked past him out over the valley. "I don't." One of the younger rangers shifted uneasily. "Captain," the older ranger raised a hand. "You could keep running," the ranger said to the man. "We might not catch you. Truth be told, we probably wouldn't." The man said nothing. "But this can't go on forever," the ranger added. "You know that." "Yes," the man replied. "So why stop now?" The man turned his eyes back to him. "I'm not stopping." The ranger frowned. "Then what?" The man gestured broadly, encompassing the land. "I'm becoming unnecessary." The ranger followed his gaze. The valley was empty, quiet. "Men like Crow don't come back," the ranger said. "No," the man agreed, "but others would have." "And now?" the ranger asked. "Now they think twice," the man said. "Sometimes that's enough." The ranger studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "We never saw you," the ranger said finally. The man accepted that without comment. The rangers turned back, retreating the way they had come. None of them looked back. When they were gone, the man remained on the ridge until night fell fully. Stars emerged, sharp and cold. He lay back against the rock, staring upward. For the first time since the chains had closed around his wrist years ago, he allowed himself to imagine a future not defined entirely by pursuit, not peace, but something adjacent to it. The next morning he walked again, not south, not north, west, toward land that thinned into dust and sky, where trails vanished and stories struggled to follow. Months passed, then years. Occasionally someone would find signs. A camp untouched but for broken chains, a group of hunters who never returned, a single body, carefully placed, weapons stacked nearby, as if arranged by someone who understood order even in death. Stories grew vague, then mythic. Some said he was a ghost. Others said he was the land itself, rising up when men crossed a line they should have known better than to approach. Eventually, the stories changed again. They always did. New fears replaced old ones, but something fundamental had shifted. The trade never recovered. Its old confidence. Not in Texas, not fully. Years later, a traveler would pass through the Brazos region and find a rusted chain half buried in dirt, snapped clean at the link. No name carved nearby. No marker. Just iron, broken and forgotten. The traveler would feel an inexplicable chill and move on quickly, unable to say why. Texas would remain vast, silent, indifferent, but not unchanged, because some violence leaves scars not just on flesh, but on the land itself. And some men once hunted never truly stop hunting. Not for revenge, not for justice, but to remind the world that cruelty is never as invisible as it believes. The land remembers even when people try not to.